Now is the opportunity for us all in the audience to channel our questions and thoughts to ask the wonderful panel, if you wouldn't mind, please, the three of you coming up on the stage, and asking some questions, perhaps raising some points. I know some people here have been involved in adherence studies, so if anyone has anything they want to share or ask, now is your opportunity. So, do I see a first question or point around the room, please?
Hello, Asim Mirza from Sidley Limited. It's very interesting, all three of the presentations. I'm a pharmacist by trade, if you like, and a lot of the solutions, a lot of the problems I thought could be solved by good quality medicine use reviews from a pharmacist, either from a pharmacist in the community or a pharmacist in a GP practice. One of the things we're working on is working with GP practices to introduce shared care plans for patients that are then signed by the patient. I know, Barnaby, you touched on something working with community pharmacies with Alison and Amanda. What experience have you got with community or pharmacist, community or GP?
Is this on? Yes.
Yeah.
So interventions in community pharmacy. Yes, so we have, and we work a lot with community pharmacists, because when I put that slide up that was about the cognitive biases and the messenger, so who the information comes from being absolutely paramount in influencing that behaviour. What we found in a lot of our studies is the pharmacist occupies a kind of very special place within that relationship that the patient has with healthcare professionals, because they see you as being the experts in medicines, not the doctor. So the doctor is the expert in diagnosing, but you are the experts in medicines. So you know about, if there's going to be an interaction, you'll pick it up and you'll tell them. And so really you're absolutely in prime position to be involved in some of those adherence interventions. And in fact, we ran a study a few years ago that was published in the Pharmaceutical Journal, and Graham was involved in it, around looking at an adherence intervention delivered by community pharmacists to promote adherence to use of emollients in childhood eczema. And it was remarkable how successful that was in changing children's outcomes. So there was a 50% reduction in itch as a result of parents using those emollients more effectively with children, because of how the pharmacist had shown them how to do it. And it was really simple. It was just that parents didn't know, so they didn't know how much emollient to use. And so they were either thinking it was a steroid, in which case they shouldn't use it hardly at all, or they were slapping it on as thickly as possible, thinking that the more the better, which of course just generated more heat, which made the itch worse. And so it was a really simple demonstration of the amount, and also how to put it on, that you don't rub it in, that you smooth it down, things that I didn't know as a parent of a child with eczema. So absolutely a perfect demonstration there of how an adherence intervention could be incorporated within a clinical pharmacy to have a real impact.
Yeah, so I am slightly biased being a pharmacist as well, so I very much agree with your perspective. I just think one learning that we had from the work we've done in pharmacy and in general practice is making sure that the flow of patients back and forth between the two is really smooth, so that the information related to an adherence question or a discussion that's taken place in the pharmacy does land back together with the patient back at the general practice, or if it's moving in the other direction, that it works in the other way as well. And I think that for me is a key learning for us that we take forward. So we may have understood some sort of root cause analysis of why a patient's blood pressure may be high still, but actually to make sure that information arrives back with the prescribing general practitioner.
Thank you.
David Allen, AD Allen Pharma. Thank you for the presentations, which were quite interesting. I've got sort of three questions, but primarily two for Barnaby. Firstly, I'm not convinced that technology is the answer. I think one of the stats in the slides is that 25% of apps that are downloaded are only used once. I think the stats that Alison pointed out about the number of health apps that are around are not regulated at all by anybody, and probably 99.9% of them don't work. But coming back to the fundamentals of technology, and your technology is quite interesting, but I presume it's internet-based. Yep, that was a rhetorical question. When you look at the stats of the technology or the internet across the UK, the target, I think, is 95 to 97% of the country will have internet by 2017. So we're 2 years away, and only 97% of the country will have internet. Where we are in Hertfordshire, just for example, there are patches within spitting distance of here where you can't even get 1 megabyte of. So I'm a bit concerned that we're saying that technology is going to be the answer to everything, whereas a large sector of the country will not have internet, and in that large sector of the country there are the higher age groups, such as myself, who are probably the people who are users of the medicine. So I think there's a flaw somewhere. I'm not having a go at you. I'm having a go at, the basis is not, the infrastructure is not in this country to develop technology to the degree that I think we're talking about. So I think that's a big problem. Secondly, I'm very interested to hear what your reaction to the regulators are in their reaction to your technology, because my only experience of the regulators, and certainly in the UK, are that they're probably at least 10 to 15 years behind what's going on, and really anything new, innovative or costly will just be kicked out of court.
So thank you. I'm tempted to agree that technology is not the answer. What we see is that we are a service, and part of that is technology, but it's actually about the stuff I was talking about at the end. It's about creating a new discussion between the clinical team and the patient, having data that wasn't available before. And if that discussion doesn't take place, if that new insight that the patient gathers from having their medicines taken measured doesn't happen, then no change takes place. We don't learn anything. So we see technology as an enabler. It is not the answer by itself. And I think from some of the things you've been hearing from other speakers to the right-hand side here, is that actually there's a whole load of other stuff that needs to happen with a lot of patients as well. So we're part of the answer, but we're not the entire answer. So I'd agree with that. In terms of the uptake of technology, it is patchy. I live in just outside Cambridge, and my broadband into my house is somewhere well under 1 megabit, so it's a constant frustration that I experience. I hear you and I feel the pain. What we've done is to look at this and actually try to build solutions that will work in areas that are not enabled with Wi-Fi or with poor 3G connections, so that the patch that I talked about can store information so that when it comes into an area where the device that the patient has, it uploads it. So we've got patients who have been using our technologies well into their 80s who've got no interest in iPads or any of the other devices that we might be using our informatics tools on. And we just leave them by the side of the bed plugged in. When they go to bed, the information loads up. And then they take that iPad with them to the surgery when they go for their follow-up. And that's when they have that discussion with their doctor or with their pharmacist. So we've tried to understand as much as possible from a patient's perspective how the technology can work for them, but recognizing that there are an awful lot of black spots where actually you just do not have access to Wi-Fi, access to 3G connections and so forth. In terms of the regulators, Proteus has spent probably 3 years working with regulators both here in Europe and with the EMA and with the FDA in the US, and we've developed de novo approval pathways for digital medicines, recognizing that it's a real challenge. And what we didn't want to do was to have to process and re-approve every single drug that we might end up producing. It would take us years and years and years, and if it cost £50 million to approve each drug, well, we just couldn't do it. So we've developed de novo approval pathways with the FDA and with the EMA to be able to expedite that process. So we're not fundamentally changing the drug itself. What we're doing is putting something alongside it. And that's been a really big investment from Proteus' perspective.
Christian, and I'd like to welcome Christian. He's come here today from Germany for this seminar. So, Christian, over to you.
Thank you. My name is Christian Dirks, life science lawyer from Berlin, Germany. We're cooperating with MAB. Thank you for inviting me and the very interesting lectures. I have a remark and 2 questions. We have been advising Medco Health Solutions in the past, and after they're being taken over from Express Scripts, I visited the innovation center in St. Louis, and they are applying pillboxes with electronic lids that send signals to the Wi-Fi, informing the therapeutic research center if the patient has taken his pill. And if there is no input, then the patient is being called by the call center. Now, in Germany, this raises concerns that the patients feel supervised, like Big Brother is watching you. What are your thoughts on this? Is this going a bit too far, or would that have acceptancy underlying, of course, that the patient has to undergo this voluntarily? And second question is more concerning the regulators. The FDA has published a policy on which apps need to be regulated in terms of approval, 510K procedure and such. And we have a similar discussion turning the focus onto these health apps in Germany. What's the situation like over here? Thank you.
So if I start answering with the second question first, in terms of approval, what we've had to do is to have an approval wrapper which includes all of the components of our services, which is classified as a medical device. So that includes the patch, the pills, and the informatics components, which then pull that information through. Shall I hand over to...
So in terms of the question then about sort of invasion of, I guess not quite invasion of privacy, but the feel a bit like that the feeling that you're being watched and supervised, and you may not want that. It's something that we've definitely discussed at Hamel around some of the new technologies and the ability to monitor what's going on, and how that would sit with people, whether they would understand what the consequences were. And I think where we're at is that at the moment all of these things are voluntary and people are aware of what they're signing up to. I know that's the case with Proteus, isn't it? That it's not something that's done without your knowledge. So you're not swallowing something that you're not aware of. You're not picking up a prescription pot that you're not aware of. So all that work that was done with the bottles that have the chip in and the asthma inhalers that have the chip in, patients are always aware that that's what's happening, and so it's that trade-off between, I guess it's how it's communicated to them, what the purpose of that is, what the potential benefits to them are, and then up to them to make that decision.
Caroline Waitley-Smith, freelance statistician. That was really interesting talks, and I'll certainly look at compliance data from clinical trial data that I'm analysing in a different light in future. One question for Barnaby. One of your slides, you had the pie chart with the 70% compliance. I'm just wondering why you chose that level of 70% and whether you've shown that that's a sort of key cut-off for perhaps affecting the outcomes, and if so, whether this sort of technology could lead to dialogues with manufacturers on dose reductions and such like.
So we've used 70% generally. That's a level where you can see an effective change, particularly in blood pressure management, which is that piece of work. We've used 80% in other areas. I think if we were to look at, trying to think of a different example, if we were looking at curative treatments and antibiotic measures, we might look at something different again. So it's almost on a case-by-case basis. Certainly, if you're looking at some of the more modern, very expensive hepatitis C treatments, you'd probably want to be looking at something further north than 80% to make sure that you're getting the treatment actually into the patient at a level where you're going to get the investment back that the NHS is making. So yeah, I think that's probably where we come to with that figure. I think in terms of whether you then look at dose reductions, I think that probably is. Yeah, I'm not sure where you go with that one, actually. I don't think that would be a very attractive discussion with the pharmaceutical industry, so I'll probably stop there before I get in trouble.
Sorry, could I just add something to that? David Sackett did an analysis across all antihypertensive trials some time ago, and he looking at what the minimum level of adherence was necessary to achieve a therapeutic benefit, and I think that came out fortuitously at around 70%. So there's probably some evidence for that, but I think that one of the key things is that we don't actually know for most of the medicines what is the minimum dose necessary to achieve a therapeutic benefit, do we? There's lots of analysis to be done there. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Darren Spevik from Events and Partners. In your opinion, with additional services and technologies to try to improve adherence, who is ultimately responsible and who should pay? Is it industry or the NHS?
Who wants to pick this one up? I think that let me take a run at that, and then I'll pass it to my colleagues. I think in terms of the responsible person, I think this is where it's perhaps the wrong language. It's about a different discussion. It's a different relationship than we've had historically, which has been paternalistic and an expectation that you'll do as I say, as opposed to having a discussion which is more adult to adult, where actually I need you to come to the table and to be a partner and to do something different. So it becomes much more of the responsibility of the patient in terms of taking their medicines.
Yeah, I'd sort of go with Barnaby in terms of that there's a partnership here, and it's a joint responsibility. How we work out that in practical terms, I'm not sure, but I think it is a new way of looking at how you manage medicines and adherence, and it requires us to re-look at how do we make it better, and not it's your responsibility or not yours. I think it's a joint responsibility as a society we need to take on.
So Darren, sorry, Alison. Are you going to?
I was just going to add to that really that I guess what your question is, for things like the adherence interventions, who should pay for them, who should deliver them, who should manage them, and I guess that the sort of way that we all seem to be thinking that we should change adherence is that there needs to be a change in behaviour of everyone who's involved in that. So ultimately everyone then is responsible for that, but how can you kickstart that? So who's going to pay for that information, that education, that training is a good question. But my understanding is that with value-based pricing and things of medicine now, that there's an opportunity perhaps there to add in some of those services to add to the value of the medicines, maybe.
It sounds to me like everyone will benefit. We're all agreed on that, but who ultimately pays? And ultimately, I think this comes back to Amanda's presentation, that it falls with pharma, because pharma is the one who ultimately has to prove, and they're the ones who need to make the money and show the efficacy of their medicines. Is that how you see it, panel? Ultimately, someone has to pay for, yeah. Okay. There was one question. I still see lots of hands up. See if we can get 2 or 3 more questions in.
Sure. Thank you very much, Ajay Barrett from Patient Connect. I was just wondering, to all of your presentations, we talk about adherence as a sort of generic term, but actually there's very different needs across initiation, maintenance, and discontinuation. And Barnaby, you talked about 4-week trials being used to determine what are the real sort of insights, and I just wonder whether that's really a sufficient amount of time to deliver or generate the amount of insight that you need to then create an effective intervention.
No, it's a great question. I think we look at this 4-week periodic use almost as a diagnostic tool. So what we're looking at then is the ability for a patient to take their medicines over that short period and to be able to understand that and feed that back to them. So we're using that as a way to determine between those patients who can take their medicines as they should and then can't.
Is that driven mainly by the cost of
No, just because we see the effect very quickly. It's something where we don't need to do more than that to see what the patient's behaviour looks like. We can see a pattern, and it is about a pattern of behaviour during that period of time. I touched on, but didn't talk about the sort of 12 weeks that we're going to look to use, which is more about embedding a different behaviour and embedding behaviour change. But certainly that 4-week diagnostic assessment, if you like, is long enough.
Okay. Okay, 2 questions there. Can we take 2 together, perhaps? 2 in this row. Yogesh.
Grant Irwin, also from Patient Connect. My question is about scalability. The challenge with patient adherence and persistence is just touching enough patients, and I was wondering what's the scale to date of what's happened, and what's your ambition for scale?
So I'll take that as a question to me to start off with. But I think in terms of scalability, it's about right patients. So I think we need to understand that this is not, and I think we're talking about all of the interventions that we might propose, this is not blanket for everybody. It's for patients who we believe may have an issue with adherence, and being able to understand specifically who is going to benefit and value from the intervention, so that we can then target the NHS resources ultimately, and that's where it will come from, very, very specifically.
I'm Yogesh Dave from Cypress Quality. I work as a consultant QP as well as a consultant on regulatory matters to companies. So one of the questions, I see the value of this chip within clinical trials, particularly where patients are taking the medication home, so you can show the adherence and that. But on a commercial level, once a product is market authorized, you have millions of tablets produced, is this going to be a chip that's inside the tablet or with the tablet? And if it's inside, then that becomes part of the manufacturing process. And how do you assure that you're going to have a chip on every tablet that's delivered? What sort of checks and quality assurance you're going to have around that?
Sure, so great question. No, so the intent is that Proteus at some point will become a pharmaceuticals manufacturer. We have, at the moment, permissions from the MHRA to put our chips alongside medicine. So we're using a small panel, as I talked about earlier, of drugs in this cardiovascular and diabetes disease area to understand where the value exists for our products and services and how to put them into the NHS. I think as we move forward, and this is part of the work we've been doing with the FDA and the EMA, is that we have to prove out the normal stability testing and so forth that you would expect to see with any other drug, except that our drugs, when we produce them, will also have a chip inside. So we already have a manufacturing capability in the US, in California, and we will look to, probably in the frame of 2 to 3 years' time, to have manufacturing capability elsewhere in the world. And at that point, that's when we transition to becoming a pharmaceuticals manufacturer, but making digital medicines at that point.
So would you be a CMO then, in effect?
I guess, but I guess so. But then,
a research-based company will probably have its own partner, and if they want to put that chip in there, is there a chance that they could buy your technology for their process?
Indeed. So we're looking at lots of different commercial models at the moment of whether we work with pharma companies and that we supply our chips to them and they build it into their manufacturing process. So there's a range of different things that we're looking at.
But I'm still not sure how you're going to evaluate whether every tablet has a chip in it and whether that chip is active.
So we can do that. We have an ability to assess the chips as they come off the production line to make sure the chip is working.
Okay, thank you very much. And Graham, you've got a question or a point? At the front here. Thank you.
Hi, Graham Phillips from Manor Pharmacy Group. Is everyone here aware of medicines use reviews and the new medicine service? Quite a lot of people, I don't think, are. You were asking about who's taking responsibility. Well, the government's already investing quite significant sums of money in pharmacy-led adherence through medicines use reviews, which is where we sit down for about 20 minutes with the patient, discuss the best use of their medicines. We did a diabetes study looking at type 2 diabetes, in fact looking at the entire metabolic syndrome in type 2 diabetes using targeted reviews, except we went a bit further than the national picture, because the national picture currently only allows us to do 400 reviews and more or less one a year. We did targeted reviews and we saw the patients either every month or every couple of months. We got stunning results in terms of all the measures of the metabolic syndrome. So cholesterol improved, weight improved, blood pressure came down, the subset blood pressure analysis on its own was of such interest that that's become a separate study of its own. So government's already investing significantly in that. If we look at new medicines, we know that a lot of people who first prescribed a new medicine, and usually the new medicines are the really expensive ones, 10% of people never take the first tablet. Within a month, 30% of people have discontinued them completely. So in a sense, we're already paying the cost. If I talk about costs, roughly 12% of hospital admissions are in some ways medicines related. Half of those are due to drug. You've got people with lots of illnesses and lots of drugs all conflicting. So that's about half of the 12%. The other 6% is due to poor compliance. What I would say is there's been a series of announcements recently. The government's just announced another £15 million to encourage the pharmacy profession and the medical profession to work more closely together. That was announced yesterday. There is a fantastic opportunity to work with pharmacy in partnership. I think technology such as yours, combined with sort of studies that we were doing, has got tremendous potential. I would like to take medicines use reviews a lot further and take them beyond simply the use of medicines. And what we really need is a really good partnership between the industry, technology, the NHS and my profession to have some, really radical improvements in outcome.
Thank you very much, Graham. And I've got a question for you before you finish with the mic there. So, Graham, it's a privilege because I know that you're a trailblazer in terms of pharmacy and what pharmacy can do to change all this. Now, the question to you then, let me turn the tables, is if you've got a pharmacy who is doing a lot of medicine use reviews, how do you know that the patients are telling the truth?
Well, that's got to do with health belief. And you have to take in fact, I've just had 2 evenings training on a health coaching approach, and I think it's very much around a psychological approach. I don't think we can make assumptions about that. I think what we have to do is engage with patients in a very patient-centred way. And if they choose not to tell the truth, that's an option that they have, just like if they choose not to take their medicine, that's a perfectly valid decision. If they want to carry on with the lifestyle that's going to kill them of heart attack or cancer, smoking, etc., that's a choice. What I think we should really not focus on that. What I think we should focus is on outcomes. If we can show by our intervention studies and technology such as yours that we get better compliance, and if we can then show proxies of outcomes like better blood pressure control, improved type 2 diabetes and so on and so forth, and we can bring a health psychology approach to all of this, then I think that's the answer that we should look for.
Thank you, Graham. And I'm very sorry, I can see there are still a few hands up. But time has beaten us. We're actually just a few minutes over where we wanted to be. We've had half an hour on Q&A. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions. And thank you, everyone, for the decisions you made today, the food that you ate, hopefully you enjoyed. The clothes you wore, well, you're all looking great. I can say that from up here. And hopefully everyone who's here chose to read their emails and saw the change of venue. So well done on that decision. I hope we didn't cost too many people with the change of venue. Thank you also, just picking up on my early point, thank you for choosing today's seminar over cricket, tennis and the budget. So I think you've made the wise choice there. And I've got to say, I thought that was an absolutely fascinating set of presentations from beginning to end, starting with Alison with the brief intro, Amanda with the impact, Proteus, how exciting is that? And then the pièce de résistance, I think, at the end with Alison again. Really absolutely fascinating, and thank you. I hope you found the Q&A very useful as well. So please, thank you again from everyone. It strikes me that the time is right for change because all the time we're hearing about more for less. And we have got, of course, Simon Stevens' 5-year forward view, where he talks about the 30 billion black hole that there'll be by 2020. Of course, we've got the 8 billion that the government is, I don't know if they're talking about that today, re-announcing the same announcement about the 8 billion extra in the NHS. But that still leaves a £22 billion shortfall. So where's that efficiency going to come from? We've had the Carter report, which talks about 5 billion, but that still leaves another 15 or so billion. So if we're looking at adherence as getting more for less, better outcomes, costing less money, well, we've heard a lot of very exciting material in the presentations. I hope that collectively, the industry and the healthcare payers, everyone can work together to making a difference, to improving outcomes, and hopefully saving some money.